Welcome to the Above Average podcast. Just a note to say, if you're hearing this, you're listening to the public version of our members podcast. To access full episodes, you can do so at our Patreon page, where you'll find a private RSS feed for your favourite podcast app and other exclusive content. We don't have ads or sponsors on the podcast, and that is made possible entirely by the support of our members. So if you like what we're doing here, please consider joining them. And now, the podcast. Welcome to the Above Average podcast, and in this episode I'm speaking with Andy Blow. He is a sports scientist who has also competed at the highest level, including finishing in the top 10 of Ironman races. I'm talking to him because he's the co-founder of Precision Fuel and Hydration and an expert in sweating, dehydration and cramping. I wanted to know, at what point does it become relevant for a hobbyist athlete to start considering issues such as appropriate hydration and fueling? Is it when you do your first parkrun, a half marathon, full marathon, or beyond? It turns out it might be sooner than you think. Andy, welcome to the Above Average podcast.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here.
Good. How you doing? You fitting well?
Yeah, I'm feeling above average.
Awesome. I tell you what, with a response like that, you're welcome on any time. That was slick as can be. It makes this podcast sound far more professional than it really is. Okay. The reason I'm talking to you today, well, actually, the reason I know of you, first of all, let's start there, is that you and your wonderful products are helping me and Jen complete. I'm being optimistic and assumptive here, but complete our 100k ultramarathon later this year. So that's how I first came across you guys. We figured that to run 100 kilometers, we probably needed to be well fueled and well hydrated, which led us to you. And also, I've taken what you've told me so far, and I'm also incorporating it into my 200-mile bicycle ride, which is coming up pretty soon. So that's how I came across you guys. What I want to talk about today is a question that I get a lot from people that are starting to exercise or getting back into exercise, but not doing it in a crazy kind of intense way. So maybe they are just going to a park run every now and again, or maybe they're looking at doing their first half marathon or marathon and so on. So they are exercising, no question. But they are not. They're not as full on as some people are. And so the thing they ask me about is, what do I do in addition to just the exercise? So they see me on Instagram running around, and they get that I obviously do the training. But what else am I doing? And I start talking to them about things like massage and recovery and sauna and ice bath and that kind of malarkey. And it's the stuff that I say is kind of supplementary stuff. But although I call it supplementary, I regard it as of equal importance to the training itself. It really is up there, especially because of my age. I'm acutely aware of having to look after myself. So I put a lot of time into those supplementary activities. But hydration and fueling is, interestingly, only one that I've really started to look at properly recently, probably because of the kind of distance running and stuff that I'm getting into. And so I'm really interested in, when somebody who is at the lower level of activity, so maybe just getting into their running or whatever their sport is, when do they need to start giving some serious consideration to fueling, which I guess is going to be predominantly carbohydrates, but we can discuss that, and hydration. And when I say hydration, everyone, including me, thinks water, but obviously there's a bit more to hydration than just that. So kind of over to you, really, to kind of kick us off on that. If I just go back sort of 10, 11, 12 years, and I was just doing a park run once every week, but I was taking it seriously, it was important to me, should I have been worrying about fueling and hydration, or was I fine to just do what I did, which was roll out of bed, rock up, run, and then do the same again next week?
It is a really good question, and one we get asked quite a lot is about, when does fueling and hydration at a serious level start to become important to an exerciser or an athlete? And I think the best way to think about these things is by putting them on a continuum. At one end, you might have someone who is literally starting with Parkrun, and they're at the very entry level, more novice end of becoming an endurance athlete. And at the far end of the continuum, you've obviously got professional ultra endurance athletes who are doing 100-mile ultra trails or Ironman triathlons and that kind of thing. And what you can categorically say is that at that far extreme end, fueling and hydration is absolutely critical to optimum performance. You need to have a really good understanding of your fueling, hydration needs, your electrolyte needs, your carb needs, all that sort of stuff if you're performing at the very highest level. If you go right the way down to the far end, I would argue that, fueling and hydration, you need to eat and drink, but you're doing that anyway because you are alive. If you get to the start line, then the importance of it is very, very minimal at that point. And basically, as you kind of move through your journey to wherever it takes you along that continuum line, you would do well to upskill yourself in the knowledge that's appropriate to your level of performance. So there's two things that you look at with fueling and hydration, really. One is, what's your total amount of exercise look like over a period like a week? Because as that increases, your knowledge of how to fuel and hydrate to support daily activity increases. And then also, what are the demands of the actual activity you're doing? Because if it is running a 5K park run, the actual fueling and hydration demands of that are relatively small. You have to turn up on the start line reasonably well hydrated and with some fuel in your tanks, and you will get around just fine. Whereas if your event starts to stray into the territory of being well in excess of an hour or 90 minutes, you start to have to learn about fueling on the move, what you might need to take in, and so on and so forth. So I think there's like an appropriate level of education and understanding that starts to kick in at different levels. And so what you don't want to do is like ignore it completely at the start, because it's a small part of your journey at the start. But the idea is to gather knowledge and gather experience as you go, because what we sometimes see is that people start off as a novice focusing on doing a bit of training, doing their events, and it's not until they get right the way up to, say, running a marathon or doing a half Ironman triathlon, they even start to think about the nutrition, and then there's a gap to close.
Absolutely, which is literally me. I mean, I didn't. And I'm trying to think back now to what I was doing. I was running things like Spartan Beast obstacle course races, which is 4.5 hours of running around and jumping over stuff. And I was doing that with just a hydration pack of water, and that was it. I gave zero thought to anything beyond, oh, it's hot and I'm going to be thirsty, and so I'll have some water. It wasn't until, if I'd even run my 100K ultra marathon the first time, that again, I just water, and then whatever chocolate bars were at the aid station. So I did exactly what you describe. I went into it and I did what you say you shouldn't do. I didn't think, oh, I probably should start incorporating this. I got to a point where I absolutely should have done. In fact, I even literally passed out on a training run for that 100K. That was probably a clue, wasn't it? That I should have been looking at it. When you pass out in the street, that's that's your body saying you might want to give this more thought.
I don't think your experience is atypical there, Mark. That's what happens with a lot of people, and it also demonstrates what you're capable of doing. If you train yourself to a good level of fitness and you're a determined person, you can push yourself a very long way and complete some pretty epic events, challenges, races without a great knowledge of nutrition and hydration, because there's a big difference between what you can achieve, what you can push yourself through, and what you can do versus doing everything optimally to get the best out of your performance.
That's actually interesting because I mean, I'm thinking back to so I did a training run for my first 100K ultra, and I ran a marathon. So I ran a marathon distance for a training run. It was a really hot day, and at the end of it, I got maybe 3 or 4 miles from home, and I was starting to feel really lightheaded. I was having to stop quite regularly, and every time I stopped, I thought, "Oh my goodness, I feel like I'm going to collapse." But in my head, I had David Goggins just yelling, "Stay hard, keep running." And you're right, you can, and I did push through it, which is incredible that the body can do that. But it's almost a pity that the body can do that, because it allowed me to get to a point where I was outside B&Q and passed out in the street. So it would have been more handy if my body had sort of in a more gentle way started to sort of semi shut down earlier on. I could have, used the phone and called a taxi, as opposed to allowing me to get really deep into a problem. Sometimes we're almost, and I was going to say men, but I mean that's I speak as a man. I know that I get to a point where I think, yeah, this feels really hard. It feels really horrible, but it should. It's kind of like social media. If it's not hurting, you're not bothering, you're not trying it, and so actually, what I'd be more sensible to do is think, this feels really horrible. I wonder if there's something really easy and sensible I can do to make it feel a whole lot better. And the answer would have been on that training run would have been, yeah, have some electrolytes and some fuel.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It is amazing what the body can do. It's amazing what the body and mind can do when you want to push them. And as an athlete, you want to be able to use that to your advantage. But at the same time, it can be a disadvantage if you lack the fundamental understanding of what kind of fuel and hydration your body needs. Because if you get that part of it right, you can still push yourself to the nth degree and push yourself really hard towards the limits if you want to. But what you'll achieve from that is a greater level of performance. And you'll also recover faster from your training. You'll be able to, and that allows you to train to a higher level, and it all kind of escalates. So fuel and hydration very much play a supporting role to your training and your performance. And the sort of leg of the stool that they represent becomes more and more influential, more and more supportive, the longer your training sessions become, the longer your races become, and the greater that your training load is. So if you take it right back to that kind of like initial 5K park runner person,
Absolutely, yeah.
I think the most important thing for them to understand conceptually is that what they eat and drink, especially in the last 24 hours before they do that park run, will not necessarily massively influence their performance, but it will certainly influence their experience, how good they feel. And so some really basic fundamentals of understanding that in that last 24 hours, they probably do want to make sure they eat a reasonable amount of carbohydrate in their diet to make sure that they have sufficient energy in their muscles. They want to make sure they've had a reasonable amount of water to drink and not coffee and alcohol and stuff that's going to dehydrate them. Even if they just did those two things right, and they limit the amount of spicy foods they've had and things that are going to up this, potentially upset their stomach, they can start to figure out what kind of foods and fluids they need to get on that starting line feeling good and ready to run. And there's a little bit of trial and error involved in that. But the fundamentals are a little bit more carbs, a decent amount of fluids, but not overdoing it. And then figuring out that timing window for eating their breakfast and having their coffee and stuff before the run. Some people can do that. Some people need to do that 3 hours before. Other people can do it just an hour before. But if you, as at the very basic level, if you could figure that little part of the puzzle out as a beginner runner, you're setting yourself up to associate performance and how you feel with what you've eaten and drunk as well as your training. And that's a good conceptual leap to make, because then you're going to start to think about those things more and more as your training expands and as your ambition gets a bit bigger.
Yeah, actually, I love that, because I used to, I mean, again, I'm thinking back to when I was doing my park runs, and I used to regard the park run experience as beginning 5 minutes before they said go. And so there was nothing really prior to that to me was park run. Now, exactly as you describe, if I'm thinking I'm going to go for a PB best time the next day, on the Friday, I will be watching what I eat, and I will be making sure I drink plenty, and then running into the morning, I will be kind of thinking about, what time am I getting up, and am I going to get there in time to do a warm up, and so yeah, it doesn't start with go anymore.
Exactly.
Let's take our park run, because the other thing that's interesting about park run, or indeed any activity where someone's relatively new to it. This is something interesting as well that I see a lot. People that are very, very good at something will give feedback to people that are very new at something without quite comprehending how hard it is for the new person. So interestingly, I see this with High Rocks that I do, multidiscipline fitness event that takes the elite athletes in the world about an hour or less than an hour. And it takes a slightly above average one like me, about an hour 20, average person, hour 30, plenty of people over 2 hours. So when people say, oh, should I be using a gel or some sort of carbohydrate supplementation mid-race? The elite athletes will say, no, you're done in 55 minutes. Your glycogen stores will suffice. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, they might for you, but for the person whose body isn't yet perfectly adapted to utilizing their glycogen stores most efficiently, and on top of that, will be on the course for 2.5 hours, they are going to need to, or at least they will benefit from having something in a way that an elite won't. And in the same way, I'll go run a park run and do it in 20 minutes. And so to me, I can be, if I'm not looking for a brilliant time, I can be a little bit blasé about it, because ultimately it's just 20 minutes. So really, what can go wrong? But plenty of people, and I was there once, I used to run Parkrun in over 40 minutes. In fact, there was a time when I would have loved to have gone under 40 minutes. 40 minutes is a very different period of time to 20 minutes. I mean, it sounds obvious, but 40 minutes, especially if you're new to exercise, is a heck of a long time to be doing anything. And so where I will sometimes turn up to a park run and it's a really hot day and I'll think, oh, I haven't really had enough to drink, but to be honest, I'll just have a dry mouth for 20 minutes and I'm done. That's a very different experience for me than somebody who is perhaps, again, as I was, maybe a bit overweight, certainly slower, going to struggle more, having to spend 40 minutes, of which 39 of them, they'll be thinking, I wish I had some fluids. So in terms of going into something like a park run, one thing that I've often told people that I don't think they should be doing is carrying water, because even over 30 or 40 minutes, it just seems to be a short enough distance that if you had hydrated properly in advance, I mean, assuming it's not a crazy hot day, I did have somebody from Phoenix say, hang on a minute, when it's it's like you're running on the surface of the sun, you carry water. But let's assume you're in Slough. Yeah, I say don't get too bogged down with carrying water. It's not very efficient to be running. You see people running around with those kind of donut shaped water bottles, and I just think it's going to make your arm ache. So what does hydrating properly the day before look like? Because you hear so many people say, and it's almost a bit of a thing on social media to say, I drink 5 gallons a day, and that it's almost typical social media. More is better, but is it? I mean, because all I tend to do is just sort of drink a bit more than I normally would. I don't give it much more scientific thought than that, and that seems to work. Am I right, or is the lunatic on TikTok drinking out of one of those flipping those gigantic jugs? Are they right? Please don't say they're right.
No, you have got it spot on. For most people, most of the time, hydrating adequately for exercise means listening to your body. It means drinking water appropriately for you during the day. When I say appropriately for you, it's going to depend on the environment you find yourself in. If you are sat behind a laptop most of the day, like I'm guessing a lot of people that are listening to this are, then you are going to have very different hydration requirements to someone who's up on a roof fitting roof tiles, or laying down tar all day, because they're doing physical work out in the elements and sweating and moving. But it's all about appropriateness for what you're doing. And generally speaking, I would do exactly the same as you. If I'm going to pitch up and run Parkrun this Saturday, then I'm usually well on top of having a bottle of water at my desk at work and sipping on it as I need to. But on a Friday, I'll make doubly sure that I'm just taking care of that. But I'm definitely not going to just suddenly double or quadruple the amount of fluid I'm drinking, because your body's not going to respond well to that. Your kidneys will go into overdrive. You start peeing a lot. You're going to flush out electrolytes with it. You can even start to get that bizarre sort of like dry mouth feeling when you overdrink water, which then leads you to drink more. And I would say it's, as you get more experienced as an athlete, and as you associate what you eat and drink with how you feel and perform, that's a really valuable skill to build up, because it's biofeedback. It's the ability to interpret the signals that your body's telling you. So if you spend years and years thinking about what you've eaten, drunk, writing it down, associating it with how you perform, then you become very intuitively good at figuring out what you need. And I think that's where there's a gulf that exists between sometimes the advice that experienced athletes will give novice athletes is there's a level of assumed knowledge that just isn't there. And so less experienced athletes, novices, people who don't have any database of working knowledge to base it on, are a lot more easily swayed by sort of things they see on social media or on the internet, which suggests to them, well, I don't know anything about this, and maybe I'm doing it all wrong, so I've got to radically change what I'm doing.
Yeah.
The chances are, if you're a normal functioning adult human being, then your thirst instinct is pretty good, and you're probably not drinking far off what your body needs, because otherwise you would be very unhealthy. You would be in a bad way. So what you're doing the day before a park run is maybe just nudging that fluid consumption, for example, up a little bit to account for the fact that you're going to be pushing yourself quite hard the next day. And it's probably better to be, dare I say it, a little bit on the side of more well hydrated than underhydrated going in. So it is kind of as simple as that. If it's, to take your example there of someone in Phoenix or someone in Sydney, Australia, in the middle of the summer where it's hot, if they're going to be out there for 40 minutes on a park run in the extreme heat, and they are working pretty hard, big sweat rate, they're not going to get critically dehydrated if they start well hydrated during that time, but they might get uncomfortable. And whilst I would tend to agree with you that carrying a water bottle is like largely unnecessary, I wouldn't also blanket say to people like there is no need to do it or don't do it if it gives them comfort and makes them feel confident about doing the distance, and take some anxiety out of it. I think what you'd be saying to them is, look, really what we need to be doing is ideally you'd work towards doing it without that, because as long as you have a drink before and after, you'll be fine. But if it helps people to overcome the anxiety about doing it in those conditions, I will happily. I go to Phoenix quite a lot for because we work with American baseball teams, so I'm there in spring training, and it is pretty hot. And I'll comfortably now, confidently run for an hour out there, hour and a quarter without a drink, but that's built up through experience of doing that, rather than just, you wouldn't expect everyone to just do that out the gates.
Okay, so and actually interesting, something else you mentioned about over drinking, which we can come on to in a second, is the impact of, or the implications of, taking in loads and loads of water without electrolytes. That would be an interesting thing to come on to. But before we move on from park run into looking at the sort of the next distance up, as it were, so that I still don't quite I say I don't understand. I don't have breakfast before I do a park run. What I do, or what I assume, is that if I ate properly the night before, although my body will have used some of those glycogen, those energy reserves overnight, because my brain's been, one assumes, still ticking over, and I've stayed alive, I will still have enough glycogen to get me through park run, and so there's no need to eat breakfast. Am I right? Am I wrong? Should I be having some Cocoa Pops?
You are certainly correct about the fact that the muscle glycogen stores will be topped up if you've eaten plenty of carbohydrates in the last day or so before the park run. You've gone to bed, you've not burned a load of that muscle glycogen, so that will still be there in the morning, topped up, ready to go. Your overnight, because your brain, as you point out, has been active, your liver glycogen stores will have started to be depleted. And the liver glycogen, so your liver releases glucose into your bloodstream, which feeds your brain. And so the point there is that when you're exercising, pushing yourself, and especially going very hard, you could see a performance decrease if you haven't had sufficient carbs that morning, because your brain you may not be as psychologically sharp and as kind of that deep level of like motivation to push really hard might have diminished. There's evidence in the scientific literature to suggest that when athletes are pushing really hard, even in a 40-minute long event, if they even swish carbohydrates in their mouth and spit them out, the brain gets the signal that sugar is coming for the body and enables you to push a bit harder. So there is like a little bit of a psychological handbrake that that could be on if you don't have. But to answer your question, like, I'm pretty much the same as you. If I'm getting up to do a park run, I'm unlikely to I'm not a big breakfast eater generally, and I won't force myself to eat breakfast before the park run. But what I will do is have an energy gel or an energy chew or something like that in the last 15 or 20 minutes before I go, just to make sure that I'm not low on blood sugar.
That's exactly what I've started to do. I love it when I just kind of guess to do something. It turns out to be right. Well, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's cool. So what I've started doing just that. I don't have, again, like you, I'm not a big breakfast eater. Actually, that's a lie. I'm a huge breakfast eater. And because I'm a huge breakfast eater, I try not to have breakfast, because if I did, it would be 4 bowls of Cocoa Pops. So I deliberately try and leave eating my first meal until a bit later in the day. But equally, going to a park run, I want to do it as well as I can. And also, I want to just reiterate as well that when we talk about things like, you use terms like kind of, biofeedback, and it is important for people. I wish I'd known this, or kind of paid more attention to it. Sometimes when people think, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm just running a 35-minute park run. I'm not. No, if you're running a first of all, if you're at a park run, full stop, you're ahead of most people. No question, because most people aren't at park run. Most people can't do park run. You're doing something athletic. If you're going and you're running at what you think is a slow park run, you are an athlete. You're at a different end of the ladder of athletes to whatever Kipchoge, but you are on the same ladder. So these things, they might be more important to elite athletes, but water, hydration, nutrition. I mean, when we start talking about things like liver glycogen and stuff, it's very easy for someone that's just a casual jogger to think, well, that doesn't apply to me. Well, it probably does. You probably do have liver glycogen. Otherwise, you're not human.
Yeah.
So yeah, for anyone that's thinking, oh, that's a bit technical. It's not. It's literally your body. It's like not reading the manual. Actually, that's a bag. So I was going to say it's like not reading the manual for your car, but who does that? It's just like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's way more important than reading the manual for your car, because you can't buy another one. Your body. Anyway, let's get myself back on track. So I don't have breakfast. So you're saying that my muscle glycogen, so energy stored in my muscles, has gone nowhere because I ate the day before carbs. That fueled my muscle energy levels. I've still got plenty of energy left there, but my liver glycogen, which will have been used to fuel my brain and all my whatever exotic dreaming, that will have been depleted, and it's that's going to be tapped into for things like mental clarity and focus and so on during my 5K performance.
You know the classic feeling that people talk about if they say they're getting hangry or they've got blood sugar low or they're having a crash or something like that. That's usually a depletion in liver glycogen, which means that your brain isn't getting the glucose that it needs. And what you're trying to ensure from the negative perspective by having a little bit of energy before the start is to make sure that that doesn't happen. And then on the positive side of taking that, you're making sure that you've got adequate fuel, so your body, so that sort of internal central governor handbrake that slows you down if there is a depletion of resources in the body is not alerted to, like, oh, we're a bit low on sugar, so we're not going to let Mark open the throttle absolutely full blast today. You want high levels of circulating blood glucose to make sure that the body's like, right, we got energy to burn, let's go burn it.
That's interesting. In fact, something that I noticed very, very acutely happened to me at I did High Rocks just gone on Sunday. So I ran High Rocks on Sunday, and I've got into the habit of having a gel as I go into the rowing station. And if you don't know about High Rocks, basically you do lots of different exercises in a row. One of them is the rower, and it happens at just before, or just after rather, halfway. So I ran into the rower and I sucked on one of your gels and jumped on the row machine. And when I came off the row machine, which was only a few minutes later, because I'm a real fast rower, I mean, there's no way on earth that gel had gone from my mouth to my stomach. And it just hadn't, nothing, it was in my stomach still. I'm assuming. I'm not a doctor, just in case anyone's confused. But I'm assuming it had gone nowhere. But I came off that rowing machine feeling like just, yeah, let's get it. I mean, I ran out of the row machine and back onto the track, and I went and ran one of my fastest 1 kilometer laps, having just rode and now being way into over halfway on the event. I just felt, in fact, that the phrase is, I'm going to say, I felt fueled. And yet there's no way on earth, I'm assuming, that gel had literally got into my actual bloodstream in any significant way in 3 minutes.
No, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes normally. If you wear a blood glucose monitor, as we've done a lot of in our office, to look at the effect of different nutrition products when you eat them, it usually is around 10 to 15 minutes before you see a measurable spike in your blood sugar from consuming an energy gel or something like that. But there are those papers that have strongly pointed to the fact that your brain knows when sugar goes into your mouth immediately, and that can have a positive effect on how you feel about your performance and your ability to perform and extract a little bit more out of yourself. So I suspect some of it would have been linked to that sort of psychological effect of the sort of the brain preparing and saying, right, well, we know energy's on the way, so we're all good to press on a bit here.
It is. I've noticed it. I can remember at first noticing it doing Spartans, where I'd have a gel on a Spartan race halfway through, and I'd then just jog off into the woods, and I would notice, I'd almost sort of suddenly realise that I was running faster, and I'd then think, well, hang on a minute, that can't be that I only ate the gel 5 minutes ago. So yeah, I mean, I'm my own experience is clearly not a scientific paper, but yeah, my experience is that within 4 or 5 minutes of a gel, and I was going to say it's placebo, but actually, I don't even think it's placebo, because when I was doing those Spartan races, I can vividly remember running into the woods and then sort of becoming aware that I was feeling better without actually that being on my mind. So it wasn't as though I was running through the woods thinking, oh, am I going to start feeling better now? I've just had a gel. I'd completely forgotten I had it, getting on with running, and then thinking, oh, I'm catching people up, I'm passing people, I'm feeling great. Oh yeah, I had that gel 5 minutes ago. So yeah, my experience is that happens. And because of that, I do like having, in fact, what I've got into the habit of doing is having one of your chews 10 minutes before I set off on my park run. And obviously it doesn't leave me feeling like I've just eaten a meal, clearly, because it's tiny in that sense, but it does leave me feeling, yeah, like you say, it's like a little kind of boost. And it is fascinating to hear that the science supports that. It's not just me being, yeah, overly optimistic that something's happening. Cool. So that's the Parkrun side, and then when you start to move up, so people running into, you know, half marathons and marathons, and actually half marathon and marathon you can almost group together, because plenty of people are running a half marathon significantly over 2 hours, and some people are running marathons close to that. So it's almost one kind of group. It's the people that are doing stuff that lasts over an hour, because even the fastest half marathon guys are taking that, but potentially lasting up to, well, for some people running a marathon, you know, 4, 5, 6 hours. At that point, I'm assuming, being a you know, on top of your hydration and importantly your electrolytes at this point, I'm assuming as well, does start to become almost critical. Well, critical if you want to get the best out of yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I would say when you're looking at marathon and half marathon, fueling fueling definitely trumps hydration in the order of priority of importance. The caveat to that is that if you are running a full marathon in scorching temperatures and you are a big guy with a heavy sweat rate losing lots of salt, then the balance starts to tilt. But from all the data that we've seen, and we collect a lot of data about what people eat and drink during successful and unsuccessful marathons, on the whole, people that want to run more quickly, and a lot of marathons, you know, the lion's share of marathons are spring and autumn. They're in cooler conditions. You know, we've just seen Paris, London, Manchester, Boston. You know, none of these are like furiously hot races. Most people don't drink a huge amount during those races. They do. People are well advised to start well hydrated and topped up with electrolytes. And we talk about, you know, the preloading and stuff that you've done before, and I think that's important. if you start well hydrated, then you can get away with and even perform quite well on relatively modest fluid intake, because the capacity to dehydrate yourself during that time span is not huge. There are exceptions. People who are out there for 4 or 5 hours who have really high sweat rates might be more exposed to risk. But there's an interesting trade-off that happens, because the faster you run, the higher your sweat rate usually, because it's tied to your metabolic rate, how much heat you're producing. But the faster you run, the quicker it's over. So, the guys who are running 210 sweat a tremendous amount, but they only sweat for just over 2 hours. So as long as they drink something, they usually do okay. And actually, the reason that they drink as much as they often do is because the drinks that they're drinking contain the fuel that they need more so than the liquid that they need. It's just that liquid calories are the easiest to get down your throat when you're running a 4-minute mile or a 4:20 mile.
That's actually really interesting, because I ran a 10K trail race recently in about 45 minutes, which makes me it makes me an above average runner, because most people were behind me than ahead of me. But it doesn't make me clearly remotely elite in any sense. I'm just a bit better than average. And I didn't take a drink. There was a water table, and as I ran past it, I did think, oh, I'm only going to be running for 45 minutes, and I was sweating. I mean, I weigh 100 kilos, 220 pounds, and it was, as you say, it's not summer here in the UK, but it's not cold. I was sweating, but I did think, I'm only sweating for 45 minutes. I came into this having drunk properly already. No matter how much I sweat, I'm going to be fine. And so, from what you're saying, up to an hour easily, even if you're sweating buckets, and unless you are somewhere crazy hot, you're probably going to be okay if you came into it okay.
Absolutely, that's the caveat: is come into it okay and be prepared to drink and recover well afterwards. And unless the exception to, if you were doing an hour of intense activity in the heat, the only time I'd strongly recommend that you prioritize drinking during that is if it was, say, you were training twice a day. If you're at the level where you're doing that in the morning and then you've got something else in the afternoon, you don't want to get yourself into a position where you're really behind with your hydration. So you might drink. So the example I would use there for anyone who's listening who's a triathlete is, if you're doing a really hard hour 90-minute pool swimming session in the morning and then going out on the bike later, don't just drink nothing in the pool, because you've then got a lot of catching up to do before you get on the bike and go out later. So the drinking that you're doing in that first bout of exercise is all about preparing for the second bout of exercise. Not It won't influence your performance in that first
Right.
bout.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. But if you're doing a 10K, in fact, as I am this Sunday, I'm running a 10K, and it's going to take me hopefully about 42, 43 minutes. As long as I go into that having had plenty of sensible amounts of water in advance, I don't need to worry about where the water table is when I'm running around if I don't think I need it.
No, it's likely to slow you down more than it's going to help. So yeah, absolutely, it would be a nil by mouth strategy for a
That's
10K.
that's really interesting, actually. That because psychologically, I've always enjoyed running past the water table because other people stop, and there's nothing more psychologically motivating than going past somebody. But I've always wondered, have I compromised my performance by boosting my ego by running past these people? But from the sounds of things, I'm doing not only the sensible thing, but I'm also getting the ego boost of running past others as well, which is a double whammy. Okay, so that's interesting on the waterfront, and the fueling side of it. Electrolytes. Electrolytes is a relatively new one for me. I had real cramp problems when I did my last ultramarathon, and at which point I thought, oh, I'm going to start needing to think about electrolytes. It wasn't something I'd given much thought to. Other than, interestingly, I say I didn't give much thought. I've got into the habit of having a magnesium supplement last thing at night, because it stops me from cramping overnight if I'd had a really hard day. So I was aware of the benefits of electrolytes in terms of them being a useful thing to have in your body, but that was the only consideration I'd given to it until I spoke to you guys. So, at what point do people need to start thinking, I might need something more than I'm getting from my diet?
That's usually index linked to the amount of fluid that you need to drink. So anybody, no matter what your sweat and sodium losses are, if you're not doing a lot of sweating, if you're not needing to drink a high volume of fluid, then drinking water when you feel thirsty, and maybe a little bit more preemptively before an event, is usually adequate to meet your hydration needs, because we do consume naturally a lot of electrolytes in the food we eat, especially with regards to sodium, salt that we find in processed foods if you eat even a vaguely westernized normal diet. So most people, the average person, has, if anything, probably has an excess of sodium, particularly in terms of electrolytes, coming in through their diet. And as long as you drink water alongside that, you're going to meet your needs. Athletes, though, often tip the balance the other way, where actually when the volume of sweating that you do, and therefore the volume of fluid replacement that you need, goes up, then supplementing electrolytes acutely before, during, and maybe immediately after really hard training sessions and races, what that does is it helps you to absorb and hold on to the fluid that you're drinking a little bit better, and it helps you to keep your blood volume up. And as you'll know, it's not, without getting too technical, I think most people will understand that the concept that aerobic exercise requires cardiovascular effort. It requires your heart to pump a lot more blood around the body for lots of reasons, and that as you sweat, your blood volume, the amount of blood that you've got, reduces, because the sweat comes from your blood plasma. By drinking fluids, and particularly by drinking fluids with plenty of electrolytes in, you maintain that blood plasma volume, so your blood stays, the blood volume stays higher and it stays thinner, so it can pump around the body more easily and maintain your performance. But really, that starts to come in acutely during an exercise bout that's probably 90 minutes to 2 hours long, if the conditions are hot or you've got a really heavy sweat rate. And for a lot more people, when you start to go into like 3, 4, 5 hours plus of exercise, when everyone is losing a sufficient amount of fluid through sweating, that your blood volume is going to be compromised.
Well, actually, what I love about that, the blood volume thing, is that, as you say, without getting too technical, but actually, it's actually incredibly simple in the sense that if you lose fluid, water from your blood, it gets thicker and it's harder to pump. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's almost a test that a 10-year-old could do at school, isn't it? What's easier to pump, treacle or water? I love that every now and again there's a part of your body or a system in your body that's doing something that actually you can break down to just being as simple as that. Thicker, gooey blood is harder to pump around, and if you're trying to pump it fast because you're doing a lot of stuff, that makes no sense. So I love the although there's clearly some complexity behind it, I love the simplicity of how it can be perceived, or how it should be perceived, actually, because if you're not an elite athlete, you don't need to know much more than thick blood, not great. So, because I am mindful that some people, I mean, we talk about 2, 3, 4 hours, and therefore are we getting into the realms of elite athletes? But actually, I talk to a lot of people who are far from elite athletes, but they sign up for a Spartan super or a Spartan beast distance, or they go and do in the London Marathon. There'd have been plenty of people at London Marathon running for way over 4 hours. So you don't need to be an elite athlete to find yourself kind of knee deep in effort, and 3 hours into something, tough mudder, all these sort of things that people kind of find themselves signed up for, and before they know it, they're exercising for a very long time. For those people, electrolytes before they race, is that valuable, or is it more important they have electrolytes they're taking on board during their race? And you even mentioned post race. Of the three, is there a better time? Is there a more important time?
We are generalizing, which is dangerous, because I think individual cases can vary. But for most people, taking some electrolytes with fluids pre-race is a good insurance policy that you're not over drinking water, you're not peeing out too much, and that you are absorbing as much and retaining as much as you can. So kind of it gets you to the start line in that optimized.
Actually, can I stop you on just to dive in on that point there? You mentioned if you take electrolytes before you race, you retain more water, you don't pee out so much. Without boggling in my mind, because it's been a long time since I was in a classroom. Why? Why are you holding more water if you've taken some electrolytes?
Because principally we're talking about sodium there. So sodium aids fluid retention in the body because your body regulates the level of water in the body based on the level of sodium that's there. So they need to be in equilibrium. If you increase your volume of salt or sodium intake, your body will hold on to a little bit more water to dilute it down to the required levels. It's not like muscle glycogen in that you can't just take more and more salt and load up on more and more fluid and like get yourself enough fluid on board to last for 6 hours or something. But what you can do is you can shift it from being like the normal level of hydration you are on a day-to-day basis to a slightly higher level of hydration immediately before you start something where you know you're going to sweat.
Okay, that's really interesting. So in simple terms, if my body has X amount of salt, it needs to also have Y amount of water to go with it.
Absolutely, yeah. That is it in a
So
nutshell. Yeah.
does this make sense then? If I'm drinking plain water before, let's say, a race, and I'm just drinking plain water, but I'm not taking on any additional sodium, does that mean, you mentioned peeing it out, does that mean that my body might be more inclined to actually, although I've taken the water, just shift it straight out of me because it just doesn't need it? Is that what's potentially happening?
Definitely. If you drink an equal volume of plain water and an equal volume of a strong electrolyte drink before a race, you will almost certainly pee considerably more when you drink plain water because it goes straight through you.
That, I love when these kind of complicated issues just you can then sort of sit them alongside everyday events. So when you turn up at your local 10K and you know there's 200 people queuing to get into the toilet because they've been glugging down from those stupid giant bottles they've seen on social media, if they'd had an electrolyte in their water, they may not be quite so desperate to go and use the loo. Then is that I mean, I appreciate there's obviously it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, is it as simple as that to an extent?
It's not quite as simple as that. And obviously, the other thing is anxiety before races. We all need a nervous wee usually before a race, but you'll need a bigger nervous wee and maybe more of them if you've just drunk water. So we generally advise people to have, rather than dramatically increasing the total volume of fluid they have, it's like have a single serving of quite a strong electrolyte drink about an hour to 90 minutes before the race. That's in addition to what you would normally drink. So you have sort of all of the stuff you normally have. You might have a cup of coffee with your breakfast, a glass of orange juice or whatever, and then you're going to slot in, rather than having a bottle of plain water, have a bottle of a very strong electrolyte drink and then leave it at that. You might have a bottle of water with you which you have a few sips on, to stop your mouth getting dry, because again, we get nervous before a race, you might get a dry mouth, but you've got to be careful that you don't do too much nervous drinking and drink yourself into that Portaloo queue. Just have confidence that doing that will get you adequately hydrated.
Actually, it's interesting because I noticed with my first couple of High Rocks races, I would glug down water because High Rocks is incredibly hot and sweaty because it's an indoor event, and I would glug down water and then 5 minutes before I'm supposed to start, I'd be trying to find a toilet, and that's incredibly annoying. What I did at the one just gone was I had one of your sodium tablets dropped into a 500 ml bottle of water, and I just sipped on it while I was filming Jen run her race, which was a couple of hours before mine, and that was it. And I didn't realize at the time, but thinking back now, I didn't need to go and find a toilet, which was handy because that would have been a nightmare, because I do remember there was a huge queue had I needed to. And I felt absolutely, I ran the entire race sipping on some water because I carry some with me, but I never got the sort of dry mouth that I get. And again, this is fascinating because I can remember running High Rocks races where I would glug down plain water before I raced. I would be desperate for a wee before I raced, and within 3 minutes of starting the race, I'd have a dry mouth. And I've solved all that by just having a moderately sensible amount of of electrolyte heavy water and being done with it. I'm actually drinking less water, but from what you're saying, probably retaining more of it, not needing to rush to the loo, not getting the dry mouth because my body's shifting water. I mean, it's again, it's one of those things where I like it when I end up doing something because it just feels probably right and turns out to be sort of backed by science. Okay, so electrolytes, and what I'm doing there, just dropping a tablet. You guys do these tablets of varying strength of sodium, don't you? So I just dropped one of your, because I did a sweat test with you guys and it said you're a sweaty sweater, or not a sweaty sweater, a salty sweater. So I dropped one of your am I right, 1500 milligrams of sodium.
So those tablets, and that's what we'd recommend for pretty much anyone before exercise who is going to do a lot of sweating, because where the electrolytes you take in when you're exercising might benefit from some sort of tuning to the rate of loss that you've got. The 1500 one, which is about 3 times as strong as a normal electrolyte drink. If you just buy a normal electrolyte tablet from
Well, yeah,
Sainsbury's
because I looked on the packet of a couple that I had already, and I realised that yeah, despite the cost of those, yeah, I wasn't getting anywhere near it. It was like a third of your tablet.
Yeah, and that's important because that ratio of sodium to fluid being quite high, 1500 is pretty high, but the idea is that enhances that effect of drawing in and retaining more water. So that's why we'd recommend that for kind of the before and after. For the same reason, for all the same reasons, you would use that after, because it's going to help you to rehydrate more quickly as well as prehydrate more effectively. And so that, if people are listening to this thinking, oh, I've got some electrolyte tablets in the cupboard, I'll try one of those, do read the packet, because the chances are they'll only give you 300, 400, 500 milligrams of sodium per litre, and that's not really, it's better than nothing, but only just. It's kind of, you need to make it a bit stronger than that.
Actually, so you mentioned there in terms of per litre, that's another thing as well, because if it's giving you 300 milligrams per litre, the reality is that people aren't drinking a litre of water, are they? So, I mean, for example, when I have your 1500 milligram per litre tablet in my 500 ml bottle, which is a regular, 500 ml, it's a regular sort of, bottle you'd have on your bicycle, I'm getting 750 milligrams. If I had a 300 milligram per litre, I'd put it in, I'd be getting 150 milligrams of, I might as well just literally put a sprinkle of extra salt on my chips before I race. That's almost made the biggest difference to me. Things like Hyrox is having that electrolyte drink before I race, because, as I say, it doesn't leave me needing desperate for the loo, and it's removed completely that thirst. Interestingly, I run with a water pack, but I only put 400 mils of water into my water pack, and I only drink about half of it. So I'm just sipping water. It's just to keep my mouth dry as I'm running. I'm not actually needing fluid. Yet when I ran my first Hyrox, having glugged down water by the barrel, I was literally going to the water table every single lap and just consuming cups and cups of water. So I've kind of gone from one extreme to the other, and yet I'm running significantly faster than ever. So it's not like I'm taking it easy. I'm performing better, but in just a much more relaxed fashion, because it's clearly a lot easier to just have 500 ml of water a couple of hours before you race with an electrolyte than it is to be glugging down water, looking for a loo, spending half your time at the water table, and still feeling thirsty. So I love that I kind of nailed that by accident almost. Okay, that's really interesting. And actually, the other thing that I do that you guys put me onto, and does this also apply to people that are doing maybe a marathon or something for the first time, or maybe regularly? I have, the day before I do something like a Hyrox, or indeed anything that's going to be taxing. So for me, if I'm running for an hour plus, that I regard that's pretty taxing. I will have, during the day, on my bottle of water that I have on my desk, I'll have one of your electrolyte tablets in that. So I'm sort of preloading my electrolytes up just in case they happen to have got low because of just, whatever, poor diet that week or whatever it might be that's caused them to not be optimal. Does that make sense the day before?
Yeah, that's where it starts to get into the realms of a bit sort of, there'd be less evidence, direct evidence for that, but it makes common sense to do so. And I would say, especially for people, the days building up to races and events are all different for different people, but a lot of the time they involve travel, they involve relocating, being out of your normal routine and that sort of thing. So as a kind of insurance policy top up, I have to be honest, I do exactly the same thing. I'm absolutely militant about doing it in the hour before the event on the day, because I know that that is proven both with the science and also with it, how it makes me feel to be effective. The one I take the day before, the one or two I take the day before, is a little bit more of a habit, and I guess as a bit of a psychological crutch to think I'm doing everything I can here. I don't see there being a great downside to it. There's possibly a small upside.
No downside. I mean, you can't, if you had it and you didn't need it, your body would just shift it on, and it would be yeah.
Where it is critical, though, Mark, I think, is when you go to some of these big events. You travel to a big international event, you spend the day before roaming around, picking up your number at an event expo. It's hot. It might be hot and humid. You might be sleeping in an air-conditioned room, having traveled on an air-conditioned aeroplane and that sort of thing. Then it starts to become a little bit more sort of consequential to make sure you're topping up on it, because you are in you have spent a couple of days then in an environment that's going to challenge your body from a hydration perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, because I mean, again, jumping to high rocks just because it's fresh in my mind. An awful lot of the people that do high rocks they do jump on an easy jet and they whiz over to do a race in Spain or France or wherever it might be. I'm off to New York next month racing in high rocks, and as you say, it's going to be or whatever 8 hours on an airplane, and then just the stress and the tension of rushing around airports and jumping in cabs and so on. And although it won't feel like exercise, I'm certainly doing an awful lot more activity than I am day to day where I'm sat at my desk. People think that, fitness YouTuber, I spend all my day in the gym. I don't. I spend all my day at my desk and then occasionally go to the gym. So a day of travel is more activity than normal. So my plan is to in the couple of days of travel that are taking place before the race, to be just dropping a tablet into the water, because I'm drinking water anyway. So to drop a tablet in there is almost neither here nor there.
Honestly, that's where one of the only few areas I see one of our products having a bit more of a crossover into sort of mainstream, into people's day-to-day lives, is if you are someone who flies and travels a lot. Like I fly a lot with work, and a lot of it's long haul, and I just found that by being disciplined around keeping, if I'm flying in the morning, keeping my coffee and tea intake to a sensible minimum, and having having an electrolyte tablet dropped into water on the flight. If I'm going straight from London to Los Angeles or something, I get off the other end feeling a hell of a lot better than if I've neglected to do that, because dehydration is one of the things that makes you feel crappy when you've done a really long haul flight. The other thing as well is on the flip side, is a lot of people when they fly, they'll have a few drinks and things like that. And if you're doing that, either reducing that or just working in making sure you're having a couple of electrolyte tablets, kind of between times, will definitely in most circumstances will make you feel quite a bit better, because you're compounding the dehydration issue if you're doing that and not doing something proactive about it.
It's been fascinating talking. I love it. I love talking about complicated things, which I don't often understand. But then suddenly having a sort of a click moment where I think, okay, I get it. I get how that applies to me or somebody doing something slightly less dramatic than running Ironman races, but ultimately with the same needs. So I love that. I'm going to link all over the place on the podcast and the notes and so on, so that people can find you guys and your products. And I highly recommend the chews, although don't eat too many of them. Whenever I go out on the bike, I have to be strict that I don't take too many, otherwise I'd come back with none after my 10-minute bike ride. So they can find that, and obviously you guys, if people have queries and questions about what they might need from you guys, I'm assuming you guys are happy for people to drop you emails and stuff and ask you questions and all that sort of stuff.
Just hello@precisionfuelandhydration.com, or via our website you can book free video calls with the team. So if you've got questions you want to answer, book a free 20-minute video call. It is not going to be a sales pitch. It's not going to try and push products down your throat. You can just chat to someone on our team who understands a bit about fueling and hydrating for athletes and see if we can help.
I love that. Sometimes people say to us, why do you talk to, or why are you sort of, working with one company and not another company? And I always say that a huge part of the people that we like to talk to comes down to them being people that we can talk to. I mean, as simple as that there are so many massive companies out there who, if I dropped them an email and said, I'm using your product, I'm not quite sure about this aspect of it, I wouldn't get a response, or I'd be directed to a website or something. But the companies that we try and talk to, and you guys are like this, are ones where we can talk to somebody, and to hear that anyone can do that. You don't have to be a kind of Z-list celebrity YouTuber. Normal humans can do it too. Is brilliant. So that's very cool indeed. Superb. Andy, many thanks for your time today. It has been fascinating, and we will talk again because you need to get, obviously, me and Jen to the end of that 100K ultra marathon. Otherwise, we're going to hold you personally responsible for our lack of performance. But yeah, in the meantime, thank you very much.
Yeah, all good, Mark. Anytime, and we're looking forward to continuing to help you and Jen along your journey to success there.
Superb. Cheers, Andy. Take care.
Thanks, mate. Bye bye.